I'll never forget that July 18th, 2009, when I opened the newspaper and the headlines read, "Crash, victim dies." And I had to come to terms with the fact that I was responsible for taking the life of Priscilla Owens the night before, when I decided to drink and drive. And I wrapped just around a tree, and she lost her life. And when I read those headlines that morning, and I was only 23 years old, the feelings of hopelessness, the thoughts of my life was over, just flooded over me, and I was just broken. You know, growing up, I came from a very stereotypical family, a family of four, mom, dad, sister, and me. We were a Christian family, went to church, I was in youth group. I knew about God and Jesus and God's love and the forgiveness and the mercy and the sacrifice of what Christ did at the cross. I was raised knowing about these concepts. But everything changed drastically in my life when I was 12, when my parents set me and my sister down and began to share how their marriage wasn't working and that everything wasn't okay and they were going to get a divorce. And my dad went from being a mainstay in my life to basically being gone. And when all of this happened so suddenly, I remember I got so angry and hurt and broken, and I put on all of these masks and I became very reclusive. I got really angry with God, and I wanted nothing else to do with him, because if God was so good, why was my family being torn apart? When I got to high school, I was still running from God. I was still running from facing my hurts and my pains. And I had all of these voids in my heart, and I started feeling all of these voids with drugs and with alcohol. I started comparing myself because I was a heavier kid and I was being made fun of a lot, and I would compare myself to others of what I was supposed to maybe look like and what true beauty was. My self-esteem and my self-value became minuscule, next to nothing. I started battling suicidal thoughts. I remember that when I was 18 years old, I climbed up on this ladder and I grabbed a rope and I wrapped it around my neck, and I was on the brink of giving up. And it was only the thought of my mother's face that kept me from actually jumping. I battled with self-harming. I dealt with eating disorders. I was bulimic. I was just a mess, a broken young man. The drugs and the alcohol led me to stealing because I didn't have money, but I had an addiction and I was an alcoholic, so I would steal from people. That led me from getting kicked out of my mother's house. It led me to getting kicked out of my friend's house, kicked out of my sister's house. I ended up going to the Army at 19, not because I wanted to, but because it was my only choice. I didn't graduate. I had gotten kicked out of high school as well. So here I was in the Army, and I was only there for 18 months because, well, I couldn't even do that right because the drugs and the alcohol and that addiction followed me. And so I failed a lot of drug screens and I got kicked out after 18 months. I was back home at 19 years old, living with my grandfather. The hardest things that I had to deal with at the time was the fact that I took $4,000 from my grandfather for my drug addiction. I was just a hurting young man. And all of that continued to grow and to snowball all the way up to when I was 23 years old. By the time I was 23, I was still living in my hometown. I was going nowhere fast. I didn't want to hear anything still about Jesus or God because, you know what, I was still blaming him from everything from my past. And then July 17th, 2009 happened. It was a Friday night. A group of friends of mine, we went out to the bar and we were just partying. By the end of the night, it was time for us to go to another house. And so I got on the phone to call Priscilla. She was going to be my designated driver. She showed up, and for some reason, when we left, she gave me the keys to her vehicle. And all I really remember from that night was her just screaming, "Tree, tree." And I woke up and I was in a helicopter. And I woke up. I was in a hospital bed, and I woke up, and my mother was over top of me, and police officers were there. The police, for some reason, released me that morning, and when I got home, and as my mom shared with all that happened in the accident, how my life was going to change, the feeling of just fear and brokenness that just overwhelmed me. That's when I decided to stay up all night, because I had tried calling the hospital and the police the day I got home from the accident, trying to find out if Priscilla was okay or not, but they wouldn't tell me anything. So I just decided that the newspaper the next morning may run the story, and it was then, on that July 18th, when I saw the headline. I'm 23 years old, and now I'm responsible for taking the life of a young lady named Priscilla Owens. A drug addict, a young man who battled self-harming, battling still currently an eating disorder. My life was a mess, and I just wanted to crawl into the corner and say, I give up. And now it wasn't only myself that was affected, but I had just impacted a family forever. Priscilla, she was a mother, she was a sister, she was a daughter. A whole family was impacted because of this decision. A few days went by, and Priscilla's family reached out to my family and asked if I could call them. I was scared to death. And all the way up to this point, I'm still running from God, and I'm still angry at Him. I ended up calling the Owens. And Paige, Priscilla's niece, answered. And Carolyn, Priscilla's mother, was there. And Olivia, Priscilla's sister, was there. Before I could get a word out of my mouth, they all were just speaking up on the other end of the phone and says, Nathan, listen. We knew Priscilla left to be your designated driver that night, and we don't know why she gave you the keys to the vehicle. We don't understand everything, but what we do know is that there's no reason that from one terrible decision that two families should forever be destroyed. We just want you to know that we love you, we forgive you, and that we want you to be like family to us. And as I'm hearing these words, I'm just being floored, because I had been running from God for so long, and this forgiveness and this love that this family that didn't know me was showing me. It was the word grace coming alive. And as they're forgiving me and loving on me, all I'm hearing is the words of Jesus saying that my love and my grace is sufficient for you. And as no matter how far that you run from me and you push me away, you can't outrun my love, and that I can write a better story in your life, and I can take any broken situation and I can fix it, and I can heal it, and I can mend it, and I can begin to show you that I am bigger than your biggest problem, and I am bigger than the biggest mountain in front of you. And I just began to weep because I knew that God was still in the middle of my life and that he hadn't forsaken or given up on me. The grace of God then began to change me. It was then that I stopped running from him. His love outran me. And it came through the form of a broken situation. It came through the form of me not getting from this family what I deserved. The Owens family, they asked me just not to let their daughter Priscilla die for nothing and to try to make the world a better place. But who didn't forgive me was the state of Indiana. And I was charged with reckless homicide, and I was sentenced to 15 years in prison. But I had settled in my heart that I was ready to surrender to Jesus, and that I was done running from God, and that I was going to keep my word to this family and not let their daughter Priscilla die for nothing. And I was going to do everything in my power to make the world a better place. When I got to prison, I had told my mom I was ready for her to send me a leather-bound Bible, a durable one that I'll study and read out of and maybe preach out of one day. And so she sent it to me, and I was kind of unfamiliar with the study Bible. And so when I got it, I was excited, and I go to the very beginning and I read the table of contents and the indexes, and there was an introduction page that was sharing how do you use the study Bible, and there was a poem. And this poem was only 4 or 5 lines long, and actually it's right here, and it said, "Give me the Bible, holy message shining, thy light shall guide me in the narrow way, precept and promise, law and love combining, till night shall vanish in the eternal day." And when I saw who the poem was written by, I froze and I just began to weep. You see, this poem was written by a hymn writer from the 1800s, but for some reason, the editor of this Bible who composed and put this Bible together, he picked this poem, and on the introduction page from the printing press was this poem on the paper, and it was written by a woman whose name was Priscilla Owens. The exact same name of whom I was responsible for taking her life in the accident in my own personal journey. What's the mathematical odds that an editor picks a poem from a hymn writer from the 1800s and puts it in this Bible? And here I am, a young man, 23 years old, that was running from God for so many years, so broken, that made a lot of bad choices, that had a senseless act that caused a woman to lose her life. And her name was Priscilla Owens. You know, God will always write a better story in our lives. And he will always, if we will just open up our eyes, show us how much he is right there with you, step by step, holding our hands. And when I saw this poem with her name there, it was just another one of those unbelievable God moments in my life. And how I continue to know that God was writing a better story in my life. I ended up not serving 15 years. I ended up only serving 3 years and 9 months. I got released for good behavior. I started studying the Bible and got opportunities to start preaching while I was in prison. And I was even leaving the prisons in Indiana and traveling the whole state, speaking in colleges and universities about the story of the accident and how you can overcome obstacles and how you can persevere through hard times. And I was getting to speak to high school students and college students and adults about the consequences and the dangers of drugs and alcohol. And I was just beginning to not let Priscilla die for nothing and impacting people's life, even while still in prison. And ultimately it led to me getting released 11 years early. And when I came home, I remember when I first got home, that my buddy who didn't know about the accident, he said, "Nathan, I was gonna throw this vehicle away, but God has laid it on my heart to give it to you." I looked at him and I said, "Listen, I don't get my license for 5 more years." And he said, "I know that, but when you do get your license, here's a vehicle for you." And he just gave me this vehicle that he was gonna throw away. And he didn't know exactly my situation and all that had happened. And he gave me this vehicle. And I remember when I walk into the garage and I open the garage door and I see the back of the vehicle, I just begin to bawl. The night of my accident, Priscilla had let me drive her car, and it was a white Jeep Cherokee. And here I was. And my friend, without even knowing it, he gave me the exact make, the exact model, and the exact color of the vehicle that I had just wrecked years ago. You see, God is in the middle of writing a better story in our lives, and He will restore, and He will redeem, and He will heal, and He will fix, and He will take what the devil meant for evil and use it for good, and He can work all things together. God began to get involved in my life in such a way that consumed me with His love. And for the past 5 years now, I've been home. And I've just been asking God to send me, to allow me to speak life to people, to students, to anybody and to everybody that I could, that how Jesus can write a better story in our lives, and how that no matter what we have been through, it's not too big for God to fix and to heal, and that giving up on life is not an option. All we must do is surrender our life. That is the best option. And it's just been humbling and overwhelming, all that God's been doing. Currently now, I travel the country and I speak in high schools and colleges and middle schools and all across this country from coast to coast. I've been able to stand in front of hundreds of thousands of people and just share with people the power of the love of God, the power of the cross of Christ, the power of redemption, the power of the grace of God, and the reality that God can write a better story in our lives. I've battled suicide, I've battled self-harming, I battled drugs and alcohol, I battled eating disorders, I battled all of these things for 10 years on my own, from the age of 13 to 23. But I will tell you what changed me in an instant, and how today I am going on my 10th year of being sober, on my 10th year of overcoming all of those things. It's the power of the cross. It's the love of God, and it's the reality of the grace of God isn't just a word. Don't give up. I promise you, you plus God is the majority. That if you will just surrender wherever you are and whatever circumstance that you're in right now, whatever your situation may be, whatever opposition may be against you, whatever mountain may be standing in front of you and it seems unsurmountable, impassable, and you feel hopeless, I promise you, you're not. That you plus God is the majority, and that if you will surrender your life to God, that He can take your situation, He can take your story, and He can write a 100 million times more beautiful one. Don't give up. Your life speaks.